We are joined now by Ben Wieder, an investigative reporter with the Miami Herald. Thank you for joining us, Ben. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
So help us to understand what information, what records did you get access to, and what do those records tell us about the folks being detained at Alligator Alcatraz?
Yeah, so we had access to, in total, about 2,000 records that gave us snapshots in mid-July and the end of July of people who were either detained in Alligator Alcatraz or headed that way in the earlier data set. Um, and what that told us really was it gave us a sense. The data contained information about their country of origin, about how old these detainees were, and it also had some other interesting data points, such as, for example, whether they were characterized as having had a prior criminal conviction in the past, whether they had any criminal history, whether they had pending criminal charges, and so it really gave us some insight into whether or not they were, in fact, criminals, as was represented about detainees that were headed to Alligator Alcatraz when the facility was being opened. Additionally, we also had some information in the second round about whether or not these folks were facing deportation orders, and we were able to verify a lot of this with looking people up in the ICE detainee locator, and there's also a database that has information about immigration cases that are ongoing. And so what that showed also was that many of the people, the vast majority of the people who were being detained at Alligator Alcatraz, did not have an order from a judge saying that they should be deported, and that's significant because again, Governor DeSantis in particular had said that the majority of people who were going to be held at Alligator Alcatraz would already have these final deportation orders, which is the judge basically signing off and saying, yes, this person should be sent out of this country. And in the absence of a final deportation order, typically that means that someone would have an ongoing immigration case, which means that they are legally allowed to stay in the country while that case is working its way through the immigration courts.
Help clarify for us, sort of the percentage of folks who either had a criminal record or had at least been charged.
Yeah, I mean, the majority of people did not have a prior criminal conviction. The vast majority, it was about 2/3, I think, did not have a prior criminal conviction. And that held true roughly the same in both data sets. It was about a third, give or take a few percentage points. And in terms of deportation orders, it was about 4 out of 5, I believe, did not have final deportation orders as well. So again, you're talking about the vast majority of people did not have a prior criminal conviction. And frankly, even the people who did, I mean, we don't know. The data itself did not indicate what that prior criminal conviction was for. So in some cases, it might have very well been for a violent crime. In other cases, it could have been for, a traffic-related crime. So, that distinction wasn't made in the data. And then there were, a number of people who had pending criminal charges. Again, no idea what those charges were. That wasn't in the data. And a large chunk, about a third, who had no criminal activity whatsoever on their record, according to these records.
Could one argue that a few innocent people have basically been just caught up with a bunch of, bad apples here? That these folks are really in the minority?
I think if you saw that, the majority of people had prior criminal convictions, you could maybe make that argument. But based on what we saw, that just wasn't the case. And we talked to a number of people, either the detainees themselves, their family members, or lawyers who talked about clients who had absolutely no criminal history whatsoever. And so I think that's the reality here. I think also, when we saw what happened to the people who were first put in the facility, we saw that many of them either remained at the facility throughout much of July or were sent to other ICE facilities. And to me, that what's significant about that is, particularly if they were sent to other ICE facilities, if these were such, violent criminals that you wanted to separate them somehow from the rest of the ICE population, well, then why would you be sending them to other ICE facilities? Largely in Florida, but also in some cases in other states as well, like in Louisiana in particular. If they really were if there was really this distinction you were making between the type of person who was being sent to Alligator Alcatraz and the type of person who would go to a normal ICE facility, well, then why would you transfer them from Alligator Alcatraz to other ICE facilities?
One attorney told one of your colleagues that we're seeing the government use psychological warfare against these detainees. What did that attorney mean?
I think when you think about the fact that people were sent to this facility, they didn't have great legal access at the beginning. That the lights were on all day. Their conditions were really challenging, to put it mildly. They didn't really have the same legal access you would expect in a typical ICE detention facility. It created conditions that were ripe for people to basically grapple with this question of should they continue fighting their immigration fight, which in many cases they legally have the right to continue, or should they give up in the hopes that it would put an end to this detainment? And one of the examples of someone we featured in the story was someone who made that very difficult calculation and decided it wasn't worth it to keep fighting, that he just wanted to put an end to this experience that he likened to being kind of trapped in a hole with no light coming in. But that's the experience that I think many detainees faced. And lawyers, have written in lawsuits about, guards pressuring detainees to voluntarily put an end to their immigration proceedings. Um, and waive that so that they could be, removed from Alligator Alcatraz. There was one instance where a lawyer wrote about how a client of his who had intellectual disabilities asked for a blanket and didn't really understand what was happening. But according to the lawyer, the guards said, "Well, if you want a blanket, sign this paper." And unbeknownst to him, or maybe not fully understood by this client, this detainee was waiving his right to continue to fight for immigration status. So it gives you an insight into the kind of pressure campaign that I think a lot of detainees felt that they were facing within the facility itself, and created conditions where for some of these people they would be willing to do anything to put an end to them.
Is there any question in your mind that what's happening at Alligator Alcatraz is very different from what we see at other detention facilities, not just in the state of Florida, but across the country?
When we talked to immigration lawyers, and I spoke, for example, with uh, uh, one of the attorneys for the ACLU, which is one of these organizations that brought a lawsuit against ACLU. I'm sorry, against Alligator Alcatraz, against the both the state of Florida and the federal government. What she told me was, ICE has 7 sets of standards for its facilities. They vary by facility, but there's 7 sets of standards, and there's a lot of overlap between them. And when you look at Alligator Alcatraz, it's not meeting those standards, just on the basis of legal access alone. And what we mean by that is in the early going of Alligator Alcatraz, it was very challenging for attorneys to get in. Attorneys were denied access for weeks. There were no private phone lines where people could get in contact with their attorneys. There's a public-facing database that ICE maintains, where if you enter certain information about a detainee, it will tell you where they're located. Well, people who were at Alligator Alcatraz didn't show up in that database. So if your family member was detained and you didn't know, and they weren't showing up in this data, they might be at Alligator Alcatraz, but you had no idea where they were. And so when you look at the totality of these things, and that's not even getting into the conditions, because there were complaints about people not getting adequate medical care and other factors that people had to contend with, not getting showers regularly, not having access to other sort of basic necessities. When you look at all of those, her contention was that it absolutely did not meet those standards, and that's despite the fact that Kristi Noem, the head of DHS, which oversees ICE, had said that yes, this is effectively equivalent in terms of its quality to an ICE facility. But lawyers who have clients there, lawyers who are hearing stories about the conditions there, are saying that no, absolutely, it does not meet ICE standards. And it's important to note that ICE does not officially operate it. It's operated by the state of Florida, although that's been a question of some dispute. I mean, in one of the lawsuits that's currently ongoing, a judge has said, can you explain to me who's actually running the show here? Because it's really not clear. But certainly by virtue of the fact that the state of Florida is running it rather than the federal government, it doesn't necessarily have to meet those ICE standards. And again, attorneys who have insight into the conditions there are saying that it absolutely is not meeting those standards.
Ben, the president and the governor have been really clear about their feelings about mass deportation, how important it is to this country, supporters of both the president and the governor want to see a tougher stance on immigration. You believe that even folks who support a tougher stance on immigration should be concerned about Alligator Alcatraz. Why?
It's a question of due process. I mean, I think, people who you can support the idea of deporting people, but still feel like they should be given, a fair shake, due process. The same thing that if you were arrested, you'd hope that, you'd get a fair trial, you'd get fair treatment by the justice system. It's the same kind of mindset. There's a way to deport people without depriving them of basic rights. And I think that's the real question with ICE. I mean, I talked to the former director of ICE during the Obama administration. He said, listen, ICE detention is not supposed to be punitive. This is where people are kept while they're going through the process. We have a process that exists. If the end result of the process is that a judge says you should be deported, then absolutely you should be deported. But while you're going through that process, there's no reason why you should be treated as a criminal. I mean, at that point, while you're going through the process, you should be given basic rights. And it's not like anyone's saying you should be, treated like you're in some fancy hotel or anything. But, you're just talking about basic standards. If someone's in prison, we expect some basic standard of safety, of health that is provided for, that if they have medical needs, it's provided for. And frankly, that if they, have a lawyer, that they are able to get access to that lawyer to provide them the legal counsel that they need. When you think about the conditions at Alligator Alcatraz, as detainees have described them, and as lawyers have described, from what they've heard, in many cases, it just isn't living up to those standards that ICE sets for other facilities. So to me, that's the issue. It's not a question of whether or not these people should be deported. It's a question of how you treat them while they're going through this process.
Ben Wieder, we thank you for your time and we thank you for your reporting. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for watching. We've got more great content for you, from news to the arts to the environment. So be sure to like and subscribe to WGCU's YouTube channel and follow us on our social media platforms for the stories that matter to you.